I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Marissa Stevens is the Assistant Director of the Burdawood Center for the Study of the Iranian World. Her research interests focus on how objects can solidify, maintain, and perpetuate social identity, especially in times of crisis when more traditional means of self-identification are absent. And we are now looking forward to the presentation entitled Persian Influences on Egyptian Perspectives, Demonstrating Authority Through Nuance.
So I'd like to thank Professor Rollinger and Professor Shayagan for organizing the second Achaemenid workshop, as well as inviting me to present. And I'd also like to thank Astrid and Clemens for all of the fantastic work they've been doing behind the scenes, helping out with the organization. So one key success of the Achaemenid Empire was the subtle art of controlling local narratives, beliefs, and perspectives within the lands of its imperial expansion. In some cases, this control walked a fine line between appeasement and manipulation, where traditions were viewed by local populations as being upheld and honored, but also Persianized to the point of being relevant to and for the benefit of the Persian leadership. Today, I want to discuss one example of this blending of time-honored tradition with a new Persian twist in one of the further reaches of the Achaemenid Empire in Egypt. And even within Egypt, we are looking far from the Nile Valley to the Kharga Oasis in the Western Desert, where Hibis Temple is located. Now, this temple is of great importance to Achaemenid studies for many reasons. While there is scholarly debate as to whether or not the foundations for the temple were laid at the end of the Saite period, Egypt's 26th dynasty, the temple dedicated to the god Amun was first decorated under the reign of Darius I. Notable reliefs of the temple include the display of approximately 700 representations of gods throughout Egypt in the sanctuary. This is a completely unique representation and collation of Egyptian divinities grouped geographically, demonstrating a detailed knowledge of Egyptian religion by either the artists, temple commissioners, or both. Also featured are traditional motifs of Darius I, both enthroned and making offerings to gods, and a relief of a falcon-headed Seth spearing Apophis, which in and of itself seems to be a combination of two intellectual streams of Egyptian mythological thought that was purposefully hybridized by the Persians. I'm in the process of exploring the possible iconographic meanings of this image and hope to present my interpretations in the near future. Other fascinating reliefs where the Persian understanding, negotiation, and impress on Egyptian religion can be seen is the invocation hymn to the Bas of Amun-Re, which Hong Yu Chen discussed in his presentation, The Ba Spirits of Amun-Re, Theology and Egyptian Exegesis in the Persian Period, for the first Achaemenid workshop held at UCLA in April 2023. This hymn has parallels in other Egyptian temples of the New Kingdom and Third Intermediate Period, as do the cryptographic writings preserved on the exterior of the southern wall of Hibis Temple that Jonathan Winterman discussed in his first Achaemenid workshop presentation, The Hidden and the Revealed, Parallel Conceptions of the Divine at Hibis and in Context. But today, I'll be looking at a seemingly innocuous and, dare I say, boring line of text in parallel placement to the cryptographic writings Jonathan analyzed. This parallel text in standard writing is on the northern exterior wall of Hibis Temple. While both these northern and southern inscriptions located on the friezes of these walls discuss the construction of the temple, they do so in different lights. The cryptographic text describes Hibis as a primordial center of Egyptian creation, along with Amun-Re being a primordial creator god. Darius I is credited with the creation of the temple, just like he is on the northern wall, where Darius's role as a builder king is likened to that what was done at the beginning of existence, and just like all good Egyptian kings who came before him. Let's take a look at this building inscription in full, which has been transcribed by Norman Degaris Davies in 1953 when he was part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art Egyptian expedition. The texts of Hibis Temple have never been published in full, and very few photos, in comparison with other Egyptian monuments, exist due to its remote location. The following transliteration and translation, and any mistakes they may contain, are mine. The text reads, "The living one, the good God, Lord of the two lands, Lord of rituals, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Son of Re, Lord of the crowns, Darius, given life like Re forever. Beloved of Amun-Re, Lord of Hibis, the great God, powerful of forms," there's some breaks, something about a mother, potentially of Hibis, Khonsu of Hibis. "He made monuments for his father Amun-Re, Lord of Hibis, the great God, powerful of forms, together with his Ennead. He built this house in newness from good white stone from Mescot, his doorposts having been erected from cedar from the western foreign lands, whose name shall be," there is a break, something about Asia, "as a work of beneficent thing of eternity, his monuments having been renewed as what was done in the beginning, so that they may give to him millions and hundreds of thousands of said festivals in the place of festival, on the throne of Horus, foremost of the living like Re forever and ever." As you can probably see, it is the interesting part of this text that has all the problems, which is the story of every philologist's life. But let's see what we can do. The most interesting part of the text for our purposes is the phrase, "cedar from the western foreign lands." This seemingly mundane phrase was part of a dedicatory inscription of Darius describing the materials used to construct the temple and exalt the deities in whose honor it was built. This phrase, though simple, contains a great degree of nuance and showcases both continuity and discontinuity of tradition and innovation. With cedar and all quality wood imported to Egypt from the Levant, the use of the word Western is curious and deliberate. So also is the term foreign lands. The Levant is not to the west of Egypt, but of Persia proper. It is also no longer a foreign land, but part of the same Achaemenid Empire as Egypt. Here, the Egyptian word ash can be as generic as to mean any coniferous tree, but it has many attestations been connected specifically with the region of modern-day Lebanon. Here's just one example of this connection between Ash and Lebanon. This is a dedicatory inscription of Herihor, a high priest of Amun in Thebes during the late 20th and early 21st dynasty, and de facto ruler of southern Egypt during the political split that occurred at the beginning of the Third Intermediate Period. This text discusses the commissioning of a divine bark for Amun-Re at Karnak. The text describes the bark as being made from cedar from the forested lands of Lebanon. So I choose here to translate the word ash as cedar for several reasons. First, in a traditional temple construction, cedar was typically used to make the doors of the temple. It was generally the only tree that grew large enough for doors to be made out of a single plank of wood, or at least several sturdy and evenly sized planks of wood. Second, I wish to link the word ash with the term hasut, which has traditionally been used by the Egyptians to describe not just any foreign lands, but the foreign lands of the Levant. For example, the title Heka Hasut, ruler of the foreign lands, was used not to just describe any foreign ruler, but in particular was used to describe the Hyksos of the Levant, and that's a title that they themselves adopted. This association with the Levantine region leads me to conclude that the type of tree being discussed in particular here is cedar. So the Persians deliberately chose to use the traditional way of describing the Levant from an Egyptian perspective, that of a foreign land, even though it is part of the Achaemenid Empire in the same way that Egypt is. They chose continuity of geographic naming conventions for their Egyptian audience. However, they qualified it by saying that these are Western foreign lands, that is, west from the perspective of Persia proper, thus showcasing their thorough understanding of these dedicatory inscriptions and the nuance behind them. In this single phrase, the Persians are simultaneously now allowing the Egyptians the comfort of their traditional geographic identifiers and also proclaiming that Persia is the undisputed center of the empire from which all regions should orient themselves. Pretty cool. But now we have reached the very problematic part of this text, which I've divided into two separate stumbling blocks in the green and blue highlighted sections. As I mentioned earlier, very few photos of Hibis Temple exist. The only photo I have ever been able to find of this particular text cuts off right where I need it most. If you're having trouble even locating the text in the photo, it's here. And if you still don't believe me, here is the line drawing overlaid on top of the photo. So we have cedar of the western foreign lands whose name shall be, and then the image cuts off. Please note that I'm taking the naming part as a future tense because I think it refers back to the name of the doors of the temple, or more likely, the name of the temple in its entirety. Since this is a building inscription discussing the dedication of the temple, I think a future tense makes the most sense and parallels other building dedication texts we have preserved on other Egyptian temples. However, it could be possible that this phrase is a present tense whose name is, and that the name in question refers to the name of the foreign lands. Traditionally, though, the region of Lebanon would not need further naming, as it is very apparent that the foreign lands whence cedar is acquired is Lebanon. But we shall turn to this issue in just a moment. Having exhausted all possibilities of gaining more insight from photographic evidence, we have no choice but to return to Davies' line drawing from 1953 and try to make sense of the sections in green and blue. For the first word, the sign at the bottom left appears to be transcribed as a plow, despite the odd curvature at the top. I'm happy to reconstruct the R above. This would put us in the realm of a word dealing with plants and most likely seeds. We then have yuen with a primary meaning of colorful, and sesh, which could mean a variety of things, but in this context probably means to spread out or strew. The section in blue is just large enough to contain a missing preposition in the beginning of the word for Asia. That would make the reconstruction for this line of text cedar from the western foreign lands, whose name is the one who bears colorful seeds which spread to Asia as a work of a beneficent thing of eternity. This would mean the portion of the text in green describes the region of Lebanon. However, it requires the reconstruction of the word hieri, which means the one who bears. It seems most likely, though, that this is part of the full word perut, here translated as seeds. I would much rather transcribe this all as one word, as seen below the line drawing. However, there are still some issues with how this word is rendered, in my opinion. The plural strokes are much larger than elsewhere in the text and have slightly different spacing. You can compare this for yourself with the previously written word for foreign lands. I think there is a strong possibility that the copy is incorrect, and we are looking instead at what should be a foreign land determinative. You can see again for reference the way in which the foreign land determinative is written in the previous word. I think it's possible that this larger sign was present in the word perut and transcribed in error as plural strokes by Davies. In the last option I provided on the left, I've taken the liberty of placing a city determinative instead of a sun disk. But even if we keep the sun disk, which seems confidently reconstructed, we could be left for the word for Parthia, as attested from the Achaemenid period. A more standard variant hieroglyphic spelling is shown on the lower right of the slide. However, I might call into question at this point even that plow sign, which has a strange curvature and suggests that it might instead be a recumbent lion or even the unidentified saw sign, which in the latter case would change the transliteration slightly. Both of these options would make the word most closely match other attestations for the word Persia, rendered hieroglyphically. Regardless of the sign reading, in this case where we correct the plural strokes to the foreign land determinative, the only two possible readings, as I see it, are both equally valid names for Persia during this time period. If we return to the translation options for the other two words of the phrase, we see that yuen can also mean a figurative character or form, and that sesh could also mean threshold. That means with admitted grammatical difficulty, this section could be read, whose name shall be the conceptual threshold to Persia and Asia. In this case, the whose name clause would refer, as I originally suspected, back to Hibis temple itself. And if this transcription and translation were accurate, how poetically beautiful would it be? Hibis, at the western edge of the Achaemenid Empire, might have been viewed as the metaphorical gateway to all that Persia encompassed. This would be the most fitting epitaph for Hibis temple, but perhaps it is too much wishful thinking on my part. I will leave you with both translations for the time being, and perhaps with further investigation of the reliefs, Should I be able to travel to Hibis temple? That will provide us with the additional data that we need to draw a conclusion. However, I suspect that the inscriptions have only deteriorated significantly since Davies copied them in the early 1950s, making this line of text forever an inconclusive mystery. What we can say for sure is that the phrase cedar from the Western foreign lands thus presents a discontinuity of directionality and perspective in an Egyptian context, despite being situated in a context of otherizing terminology traditionally used by the Egyptians. The Persians expertly combine the tradition with which the Egyptians have been accustomed when referring to Lebanon, while at the same time impressing on the Egyptians that they are now embedded in a larger political unit, with Persia existing as at the center of the Achaemenid universe. The remainder of this line of text may refer to Lebanon as a land who bears colorful seeds, or it may refer to the naming of Hibis as a gateway to Persia. The first option presents a situation where an entire word must be reconstructed from what could be entirely a single word, and the resulting phrase, while grammatically correct, describes Lebanon in an unparalleled way, all while Lebanon is not usually provided any epitaphs in these types of building inscriptions. The second option requires the assumption that the plural strokes were misinterpreted in the transcription by Davies, and that possibly one or more other signs be reinterpreted as well. Grammatically, the words are in direct apposition to one another, which is not unheard of in Egyptian syntax, but not what we would necessarily expect. Of course, we also would not necessarily expect a new 27th dynasty Egyptian temple springing up in the middle of Kharga Oasis under the commissioning of Darius I, especially if we compare his building program to previous Egyptian kings. So perhaps this unexpected phrase is quite fitting. In the end, Darius I acted as a good and just Egyptian pharaoh, building his monument in Kharga Oasis just as had been done since the beginning of time, and the Egyptian gods rewarded his actions appropriately. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to taking your questions and getting feedback about this tricky subject.